Right, good morning. We are going to make a start, and that's my very loud cue for Nathan, just to let you know we're soon going to be making a start. Welcome, thank you for joining us this morning for the Stand Up to Racism opening plenary on fighting for anti-racist workplaces. I'm really proud to be joined by some excellent speakers this morning on this panel particularly. I'm Kudsia Batool. I'm the Head of Equalities and Strategy at the TUC, and fighting for anti-racist workplaces is absolutely at the core of who I am and the work that I do, and why I'm really glad to be chairing this session today. And this morning, we're going to be hearing from Paul Nowak, who's the General Secretary of the TUC, Dean Pounder from the FBU, Riz from the Mighty, hi Riz, Margaret from Unison, and Shav, who is the Welsh General Secretary. And I think we'll start, if that's okay, Nathan, with Paul's video.
My name is Paul Nowak, I'm the General Secretary of the TUC, and I just wanted to record a quick message to everybody that's at the Stand Up to Racism conference for trade unionists this weekend. First of all, just apologies, I can't be with you this weekend, but I know that there are loads of good TUC colleagues who will be there. Kudsia, Riz, Wilf, a whole range of colleagues who are playing a really important role in taking forward the TUC's work on supporting black workers and tackling racism at workplaces and across our communities. Last year, our anti-racism taskforce, which was chaired by Patrick Roach of the NSUWT, reported to our Congress, and we are absolutely committed to making sure that 2023 is the year that we take action on racism rather than just publishing reports. It's no use having reports that gather dust on shelves. What we need is action in our movement and in our workplaces. And I think there are three things that I just want to stress in my contribution today. First of all, we've had a whole spread of TUC unions sign up to our anti-racism manifesto. And I want our unions to live the commitments that are in that manifesto. That means going back into workplaces, organising black workers, putting race on the bargaining agenda, taking forward a policy agenda that's going to benefit black workers up and down this country, really making this a central element of all of our work during 2023. Secondly, I want us to live up to our aspirations as employers as well, so that unions are good places for black staff and officers to work. And we know that sometimes we haven't walked the walk when we've talked the talk, so it's important that our organisations think hard about how we recruit black staff, how we give them career progression, how we support them, how we give them voice in our organisations. I want the trade union movement to be a great inclusive place to work for everybody, including all of our black staff and officers, and so we'll be taking that work seriously this year as well. And then finally, and this is something I said at Congress when I accepted the nomination to be General Secretary last year, I want us to build a bigger, stronger trade union movement. But it's a trade union movement that has to be more diverse, more representative as well. A trade union movement that doesn't speak effectively for black workers, that doesn't give them opportunities to become active in our organisations, that doesn't allow them to effectively organise, isn't a trade union movement worthy of the name. So we'll be doing what we can through trade union education, through our regional TUCs and the Wales TUC, through all of our structures to try and bring more black workers into our unions, into activism, sat round our decision-making tables. They're our commitments to our black members, the people we aspire to represent over the course of the next year. Thank you for everything you're doing to make the trade union movement a genuinely diverse and inclusive place. Together we can tackle racism. Together we can stand up for black workers across workplaces, up and down this country. Together we can make a difference.
And thanks to Paul there for setting the scene. I want to welcome everybody here again, and also people online. I know that there have been some problems accessing online, so hopefully people will be able to join us. But I am going to do what I always do, which is I'm going to abuse my position in the chair. So apologies to my fellow speakers. And I just want to follow up on Paul's words. You know, over 2 decades ago, the TUC and our trade unions, we worked together to set up the Stephen Lawrence task group to tackle institutional racism. And it was really important that no one, including our trade unions, were exempt from the possibility of institutional racism. But it's clear, right, that despite the progress made, more must be done. And Paul outlined some of the challenges in his opening address. In the 20 years since then, we've made important strides forward. We publish a biannual equality audit, we deliver training for unions and their reps on tackling racism, and we reformed our rule books to put the fight against racism front and centre. These are really important developments, we know that, but we can't rest there, and we really have to build on them. But we also really know what is most important is what happens in our workplaces, where we need to see real progress and real change to ensure that Black workers are valued, respected, and treated with dignity and fairness. And folks, we're just not seeing it. We put out a report just before Christmas called Still Rigged, and it's a shocking indictment of racism in the labour market. And it's a really shocking indictment of the fact that people that experience racism don't report it because the confidence of their employer and of their unions to support them fully just isn't there. Black workers, our members, they rightly expect us to stand together with them, united in fighting for fairness and justice. And we owe it to them to repay the trust they place in us and have placed in them. Let's not forget on whose back our movement was built. To do whatever it takes to win the fight against racism at work. Yet workers' rights are being threatened daily, and union busting tactics are becoming commonplace. Just this week, we saw really draconian anti-strike legislation be pushed through, which is really going to fundamentally impact our rights at work and our right to strike. But Black workers in particular are facing mounting battles in fighting, in securing safe and decent permanent jobs and in fighting the cost of living crisis. Their lived experience of racism in the workplace and in wider society needs solidarity and support from our movement. Our fight for decent jobs, fair pay, health and safety workplaces, dignity at work, and for the rights of all workers to be respected has to be central to our fight for racial justice. The two things are not separate from each other. And if you do the work that we do and people in this room do and people online do, you'll know it's exhausting when they're talked about in separate terms. Economic and social justice for Black workers has to be at the core of all the work that we do. And this is a watershed moment for us. You know, over 2 decades since that Stephen Lawrence task group that I mentioned, our anti-racism task force, our race relations committee, and our Black workers are urging all unions to take concrete actions to build our movement, strengthen and grow our membership, and build worker power. And diversity's got to be at its core. Racial justice has to be at its core. And we can't stop there. We have to commit to ensure that the pendulum is swung in favour of workers in the world of work and wider society, and ensure that every union demonstrates their commitment to implement concrete actions on anti-racism and continue to deliver anti-racist workplaces. I'm going to quote my colleague over here. You know, people are sick to death of talking shops. We need to see real action and real change, and we can't stop until that's delivered. So thank you for indulging me in the chair for a minute. And on that note, I'm going to move to, because we're still waiting for people to log on online, I'm going to move to Margaret as our speaker, please. Margaret Greer from Unison.
Oh. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, because I like to make sure that you can. And so thank you so much for your invitation to say a few words on behalf of Unison, the trade union. Part of my presentation today will be on a personal as well as a work capacity, as well as acknowledging my work as a local councillor in the London Borough of Enfield, because all of these three are areas that are integral part of my life and focus every day. So conference, who am I? I'm a survivor. I'm a descendant of survivors. I'm a strong Black woman who stands on the shoulders of my ancestors with pride and dignity and respect, which says to the world that I not only possess the ability to play and adhere to the rules, but to ensure I uphold and play an active part in the change-making process that is so needed right now. You see, I don't need you to fear me, to despise me, to be jealous or pity me. What I need from you is for you to see me, to hear me, and to walk with me, as our paths to equality of opportunity may have started differently, but our sliding doors have brought us here today for a reason. And so when we see unacceptable levels of discrimination in the workplace, we all have a duty to speak out. So my friends, Black people have a voice, but when it comes to decision-making and those decisions do not reflect the needs of Black people, then it's time for Black people to stand up and take their rightful place on the world stage. It's by tackling these injustices that we are creating a legacy for the next generation. So when Unison's General Secretary, Christina McAnear, recently wrote to the Home Secretary to express Unison's deep concern at the decision to withdraw from key commitments regarding the Windrush Lesson Learnt Review and its recommendations, within that letter, Christina said that these were important commitments that were recommendations that were arrived at following detailed evidence given by those affected and traumatized by this scandal. And the aims were ensuring that something like this didn't happen again in the UK. But conference, as we can see, the Home Secretary has clearly not learnt any lessons as she continues to treat the Windrush generation and those fleeing their lives with utter contempt. This hostile environment is unacceptable, and I, for one, conference, am no longer willing to put up with it. We estimate in Unison that we have around 185 Black members, mainly in health and local government services, with significant numbers working in social care and schools on zero-hour contracts, insecure jobs and low pay. Over the past 2 years, we have seen the disproportionate impact to and hit to communities being exposed and hit particularly hard during the COVID pandemic. All these layered on top of a history of institutional racism, which this Westminster government continues to deny, but we know it's all too real and it's intensifying. So it's time for us to take forward Unison's vital work on race equality alongside the TUC Anti-Racist Taskforce and make this year the year of Black workers. To acknowledge the union's long history of achievements, but to produce practical steps for change, and to refocus our minds on challenging racism in the workplace. It is only by having those uncomfortable conversations together about race that is deep-rooted in society that we can dare to dream to eradicate it. Unison's campaign is underpinned by the following mission statement: establishing legacy to generate change. And through this mission statement, 2 themes will be our focus: legacy and change, as an overarching strategic intent of Unison. You see, we believe that tackling racism in the workplace and wider society must be managed in a way that has courage, purpose, and direction. Our objectives and strategies in working with each other must be taken seriously if we are to succeed in our quest to tackle decades of discrimination and reshape the experience of Black people. Trade union activism for Black people has been long in our history, but it has hardly ever been acknowledged. So I believe that racism is often subtle. The subtleties are easily understood by those being discriminated against, but not always easy to describe. It may be based on a person's culture, color, nationality, or way of life. It may affirm the equality of human worth, but utterly deny this by insisting on the superiority of a particular culture. It may admit equality up to a point, but impose a glass ceiling higher up. But whatever its subtle disguises, conference, racism is deeply divisive, intolerant of difference, and a source of human suffering. And so tackling inequality must start with you. Recognizing the effects of your actions will affect change. And that is why it matters that the likes of Braverman, Patel, Sunak, Badenoch, and the rest of them are not just typifying Britain as the racist state that it is, but are doing all in their power to demonstrate that even they who belong to sections of the population that are most historically vulnerable and oppressed can be trusted to run things, protect the interest of the economically wealthy and socially powerful, and compound the racism of the state.
Margaret, 1 minute left.
So it's why it matters that as far as Black Britons are concerned, accepting institutional racism and structural racism exists must be the first step. If we are truly to deliver in our workplace and trade unions, we need to stop chatting and start action to redress the obscene situation. You see, anyone who understands self will understand where I'm coming from. Because if we are willing to take a knee to bring our collective strength to tell it like it is, then who can stop us? And so finally, as I hope you can see and understand, that as a Black woman, I'm not a 1 in a million kind of girl, but a once in a lifetime kind of woman. That I'm not part of the problem, but part of the solution to change in the workplace and race relations in Britain today. So in this working class Britain, this multi-ethnic, multilingual and multi-faith, remember, challenges are what makes life interesting, but overcoming them is what makes life meaningful. So on behalf of Unison, thank you for your time and have a great conference.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Riz from the TUC, and I'm going to start off by going back to what Kudsia mentioned earlier, and that was back around 20 years ago in 1999, we saw the publication of the Macpherson report into the murder of Stephen Lawrence, which challenged all organizations to tackle institutional racism and kind of lead on that. At the time, the trade union movement recognized that alongside other institutions, it also needed to act. And the TUC General Council at that time established a task group to oversee the work to tackle institutional racism within the movement. So a significant outcome of the work of that task group resulted in the TUC changing its rules, stating that all affiliates outlined a clear commitment to promote equality and tackle discrimination. Alongside that rule, there were other programs that took place, such as a racism hotline for members to report and call up if they've experienced workplace discrimination and racism in the workplace. And the task group also fundraised for the Stephen Lawrence campaign. The establishment and outcomes of the Stephen Lawrence Task Group represented a fundamental change in attitudes towards race within the movement. It recognized that Black workers are an integral part of trade unions, and that if the movement was to be revitalized, problems of racism in the movement needed to be tackled. And while the task group led to a change of attitude in the movement around issues of racism, there remained fundamental problems with the approach to racism in the workplace. So these included that while the movement recognized the institutional nature of racism, much of the strategy for tackling workplace racism was reactive, centering around dealing with individual cases of racism that seek purely legal solutions. And in the broader context, racism has tended to be viewed as a problem related to the activity of the far right. Much campaigning against racism focused on the work done directly or through supporting anti-racist, anti-fascist campaigns against the far right. And although the work, this work in particular has been vital, it has not addressed a central issue, the need to collectively organize and build the power of all workers to tackle systemic and institutional barriers that increasingly exploit the workers, especially Black workers, in a more exploitative and insecure labor market. And it needed to be recognized that the Black workers proportionately make up a large part of the working class and are a central element in the struggle to revive working class collectivism and solidarity. So this lack was further exacerbated by the framing of Black communities as outsiders following the declaration of the War on Terror in 2001 and a renewed political focus on asylum and migration. So this was essentially shaken up by the murder of George Floyd in May 2020. Floyd's murder saw a reinvigoration of the Black Lives Matter movement, placing debates around structural racism and institutional racism center stage nationally and internationally. And it's tragic that it's taken yet another death of a Black person for institutions to realize they needed to do more on race. Also, the COVID pandemic highlighted the vulnerability of Black workers, the unnecessary deaths of workers exposed to the virus due to their overrepresentation in frontline jobs. And it highlighted the fact that racism continues to lock a large proportion of Black communities into exploitation and poverty. So it was against this backdrop that the TUC General Council launched the TUC Anti-Racism Task Force in September 2020, with the aim of renewing the trade union movement's commitments and commitments to economic justice and social justice for Black workers, trade union members, activists, and also union staff working in trade unions. So it operated for 2 years. And while the task force itself has come to an end, the TUC General Council has set up a committee to monitor how the outcomes of the task force are being used over the next 5 years. So I'm going to briefly talk a bit about the task force and some of the highlights. So the task force established 4 working groups to enable it to undertake the work needed to achieve the aims of the terms of reference. These working groups covered collective bargaining, public policy, organizing, and unions as employers. And each of these areas provided significant challenges for unions when it comes to tackling institutional racism. So to go into briefly into each one of them. So in collective bargaining, much of the day-to-day work unions undertake in tackling racism in the workplace is individual casework. While this is essential, it is not led to a fundamental change in the institutional practices that deny access to employment, advancement, and progression and training opportunities. So the challenge for the collective bargaining work stream has been to look at unions, how unions need to what unions need to do to collectivize issues on race in the workplace and in order to tackle institutional racism. As part of this work, the workstream carried out roundtables examining union activity that attempted to collectivize issues on race and discuss the lessons that could be learned from those union initiatives. Also, we identified a range of issues, including that unions need to, what unions need to do to secure industry agreements on race, and what reps need to do to learn to collectivize race issues in their workplace. So this work stream also brought union legal officers and leading employment lawyers together to discuss how the union movement can use the law in a more strategic way to tackle structural racism at work. And this discussion examined what needs to be done to use information unions have from individual cases effectively. So, for example, what kind of training do reps and union officers need to effectively undertake case preparation, and what areas of law should be proactively used to tackle institutional racism at work? When it came to the organizing work stream, we know that Black self-organization in unions plays a pivotal role, providing Black workers with a space to discuss issues of race in the workplace, but also serves as a conduit to raise these issues within the unions, as well as considering what unions need to do to support current and new activists in the movement. So the organizing work stream looked at barriers that hinder that involvement. It was recognized that this was essential if improving the representation of Black workers at all levels in the union is to be achieved. The workstream also established a pilot regional leadership program for the TUC Southwest region for Black reps and activists, and the program has been running for a year and has been designed to enhance activists' organizing skills. So it includes stuff like communicating as a trade unionist, understanding union structures, breaking through those barriers, running campaigns, organizing power, and leading projects and networking. So it's anticipated that all the regions will follow in this and set up their own programs, and this will help reinvigorate the trade union movement's kind of networks and Black networks and structures.
Riz, got 2 minutes.
You got 2 minutes. Okay, so I am going to very briefly talk about, I'm going to skip public policy and go to unions as employers, because everyone knows the challenges when it comes to public policy. So quite an important work stream was unions as employers, and this group identified 3 areas for action. Firstly, they surveyed TUC affiliates, recruitment and employment policies to understand contemporary practices in trade unions. Secondly, we surveyed Black staff employed by unions to ensure their voices were part of the discussion about changes that were needed. And finally, we established a union human resource officers network so that unions can collectively examine examples of good practice and discuss changes that need to be made. So the task force concluded its work at Congress in last year, alongside the activity of the work streams. But as part of its final report, which I have some copies of over there, the task force is proposing an action plan for affiliates as a basis for future activity on racism across the movement. So finally, at last year's Congress, the task force asked union general secretaries to sign their unions up to the manifesto of commitments the task force believes can lead to transformational change within the movement. I don't know if Kudsia, you can show the manifesto. Okay, great, perfect. I've got some copies there, but there's 42 commitments in collectively in both of those documents. So I think there's plenty of work to do for unions and for the TUC around that. So although the task force has come to an end, the TUC General Council recognises that this is just only the beginning of the process, and for change to take place, we must act now. So if real change is to happen, the work of the task force must be used and its action plan and manifesto implemented across the union movement. And to encourage unions on this journey, the TUC General Council has established an implementation oversight group, which is to monitor how the outcomes of the task force are being used in the next 5 years. Ultimately, the aim must not be to only tackle institutional racism, but also to make the movement more inclusive and democratic. And in this way, the trade union movement can be reinvigorated and rebuild power in the workplace and community to fight the increasing exploitation and oppression we all face. Thank you so much.
Thanks for that, Riz, and thanks also to really tying down all the things we want to do to actual actions we need to take. And Riz mentioned we have got copies of this. Please do, take them away. They are on our website. It's really important. And also hold our unions to account over implementing them. We're going to go to Dean, who is now available. Hello, Dean. Welcome. Lovely to see you.
Morning, conference. I'm very happy to be a part of this conference of like-minded and forward-thinking individuals. So I'm sure we can all agree that we all share one common goal, which is our ambition, our passion to influence change for equal treatment for all people, especially in the workplace, which is increasingly becoming more and more of a concern for me. Why? Because more and more I am listening to stories. As an FBU rep, I'm listening to stories from Black and ethnic minority people of the mistreatment they currently and or previously experienced at work. Because more and more I am witnessing and being informed that senior managers of organizations are out of touch, lacking empathy, and quick to dismiss our concerns, as I personally experienced on more than one occasion. Because more and more Black and ethnic minority people are struggling with their mental health due to the workplace and environment and their lack of support. Now, because we have institutions such as the London Fire Brigade that's been found to be institutionally racist and misogynist, as Nazir Afzal concluded from his cultural review of the London Fire Brigade. But a few days ago, during the London Assembly follow-up of the culture review, Nazir stated, London Fire Brigade is institutionally racist because people of colour were more likely to be disciplined, less likely to progress, more likely to suffer abuse, less likely to be listened to. And this was true of many institutions. Nazir also reveals that since the release of the culture review, he has since been inundated by employees from across the entire fire service sector up and down the country of how bad things are. And not just only the fire services, other uniformed services as well. It's the same everywhere, he says. But what really saddens me was this next statement by Nazir. And he said the following: there is no safe place for a firefighter of color or a woman firefighter anywhere in this country. I'm going to repeat that again. There is no safe place for a firefighter of color or a woman firefighter anywhere in this country. Now, in a report by The Guardian back in March 2021, the London Fire Brigade Commissioner himself said the following, The benchmark for me is I have a young mixed heritage daughter. Can I say with confidence that she will be treated with dignity and respect in every single part of the London Fire Brigade? No, I can't. And there's over 100 stations in London. I too mirror those very same words for my 4-year-old son. Now, part of the culture review, which can be downloaded online, says most abuse goes undetected and it takes courage to ask for help. Victims are beset by feelings of shame, guilt, and fear. They should be able to have confidence that credible allegations will be adequately investigated and that they will be appropriately supported. Now, I know I'm going on about the fire services, but that's because I am a firefighter and I have been for 18 plus years. And from the very start of my career till this very day, I have been mistreated and marginalized. And I'm also a union official for the Black and Ethnic Minority section of the Fire Brigade Union. And I take my role very seriously, especially when it comes to the support of my members. But though I reference the fire services, I know that I am also referencing many institutions across the board that many of us are employed by and that many of us have suffered very similar experiences. The groundbreaking research by the TUC found hundreds of thousands of BME workers face racist behavior, from banter to jokes through to bullying and harassment. I myself have experienced this, but 4 in 5 of us do not report racism out of fear of not being taken seriously or it having a negative impact on our work life. I too never, or once upon a time, did not have the courage to report incidents that was related to myself. And it still annoys me to this very same day when I think back of those incidents that I did not have the courage that I have today. But should we be surprised that racism in the workplace is common behavior within our institutions in 2023? Let's look at the McPherson report. Over 20 years ago, what has really changed within the police service? I'll tell you what's changed. They've learned how to hide the unforgiving behavior towards the Black and ethnic minority community. That's what's changed. So one can only wonder how their own Black and ethnic minority staff members are treated within the police service across the board. Also, the current broader right-wing political developments and media discourses have literally legitimized and normalized racism, xenophobia, and anti-immigrant sentiment. The discourse plays a destructive role in shaping the forms of racism that we continue to encounter every single day of our working lives. Our current Home Secretary, whose name I will not mutter out of fear I may eliminate the ability to taste food again. But what was it she said? Describing the arrival of asylum seekers to the UK southern coast as an invasion. She somehow forgotten that her own parents migrated to the UK back in the 60s. So from the culture review of the London Fire Brigade, members were able to talk of their lived experiences, which is very, very important because quite often we do not get the opportunity to talk of our lived experiences, which has become a great shock to many people. And I'll just speak of one or two very briefly. I joined in 2004. And when I joined the fire services back in London, for me, that was a job for life, or so I thought. I passed out after 17 weeks and I joined a station, a good station in London, which is now closed down. But within my first 2 years, I had my first experience of racism, where me, myself, and 2 other Black colleagues had banana skins placed on our fire kit. Now, it was reported, an investigation ensued. I was interviewed. I was informed that I had a right to representation. I found this out later on. But first I was interviewed as a witness and then as a possible perpetrator. So you can imagine 2 years into my career as a firefighter, my first proper job, policies and procedures were new to me. So I'm still learning and I'm now being investigated while I'm a probationer. But you're made to feel guilty, even though you know you've not done a thing wrong. This is This was the lack of care that I received, the lack of care and the lack of support. Through to the end, the perpetrator got found out and got sacked, but that had done lasting damage to me. And still to this day, I wish I had the courage to have said and to have defended myself and to have said, you know what, no, you're not talking to me this way. You are not investigating me as a perpetrator. Absolutely no way. But, you know, we skip forward 10 plus years living and working at the opposite end of the country, and the treatment continues. So, you know, it's not restricted to one area. It is literally from north to south, east to west. And I mean, I'll be here all day if I was to talk about my experiences, but I'm not going to do that. But the Fire Brigades Union, we are committed to eradicating racism in the workplace. And it is a personal goal of mine to effect change within my region. So on that note, I know there are many other speakers here who got to speak, and I know that my time limit is almost up. So I'd just like to thank you for listening to me, and solidarity to all here in this conference. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dean. And I just want to say thanks for joining us, and thanks for persevering with joining us. And also thanks for sharing your journey. And what I will say is you're not alone. And, you know, it's absolutely awful that you had to go through that, that people are still going through that. But I just want to reflect on one thing you said. You said that you wish you had been stronger, that you wish you had spoken up. It's not your responsibility, right? Workplaces have to do better and be better for their Black staff. Dean also mentioned our Still Rigged report again, and that's the report I referred to earlier, which I would really urge people to listen to read. Trigger warning, it is awful. Right, have we got Shav? We have got Shav. Welcome, Shav. I'm going to hand straight over to you to finish the session.
I wanted to talk a little bit about what we've been doing here in Wales, and how we have been trying to find ways and means of making Wales, Welsh workplaces anti-racist. The situation here, I would say, is very much similar to what we see across the UK. And of course, the TUC have done lots of work in relation to this already. The difference, though, is that we have had some good, we've got a slightly different position in that we have got a government that is not Tory. And that makes some difference in that we now have an anti-racist Wales action plan. And as far as the anti-racist Wales action plan is concerned, the good thing about it is that we, as the trade union movement, were heavily involved in the development of that anti-racist Wales action plan. And what we have done since then is we have tried to see how far we can push the recommendations into a way that is broken down by sector, and those recommendations become a reality. So what is the role of the union movement? So we responded to the initial consultations. We made sure that we had that each of our unions were fully involved, because we know that during COVID in particular, we saw massive issues in the Welsh NHS. One of the first Asian doctors to die in the UK from COVID because of the fact that he caught COVID whilst coming back into work, having been a retired doctor, and not being given the right level of PPE caused, you know, all kinds of ripples in the Black Asian minority ethnic community, but also more widely. And it led us to a position where we knew that the reason why this stuff was going on in the first place was very much what this doctor had talked about himself with other colleagues of his as well, who have, you know, since then spoken to us about some of the experiences that he had, but also other experiences that people continue to have, unfortunately. I would also say that what we have done is we've developed our own sort of action plan in terms of a plan that it's quite easy to follow. And if I could post it in my chat box, I would, to the link, but I'm on my phone at the moment and I'm trying to figure out how best to communicate with you. So we have developed a very short checklist for union reps so that they can actually understand that this is not simply just us saying show racism the red card, because quite often when we talk to union reps, they'll say to us, well, our branch is already signed up to show racism red card. Oh, we already attend the Stand Up to Racism demonstrations. We already, do all of this stuff. And the focus was still very much on people really feeling quite nervous about the fact that they were going to be called out as racists. And they also knew that some of this stuff was true and real because of the responses to the consultations that we had done, some of the listening circles and the individual workers, some of them who weren't members of a union or had left a union because of the fact that they had such a bad experience and a lack of acknowledgement and understanding. Similarly, as I guess I would say some of you would have seen now, even over the last few weeks, what you've heard in terms of sexual harassment in the workplace, particularly in relation to the Welsh Rugby Union. It is very systemic, it is very cultural. There is the unfortunate focus on things that become the big talking point. So again, it's been all in the press over the last few days over a particular song, for example, that is often sung at rugby matches, and instead of actually dealing with what is happening in the first place. So we wanted to make sure that our union reps were tooled up so that they actually understood what their role was, how they can actually ensure that when it comes to negotiating policies in the workplace and frameworks, that they are very clearly anti-racist to begin with, that they had a mechanism whereby they could collect information, and if they needed any support, or actually they didn't actually know where to report certain matters in to get the help that was necessary, but also what level of enforcement there is. Because that's, to be honest with you, that is one of the biggest things that we often find, is that the unions, our union reps, really, our unions are meant to be acting as the enforcers of creating anti-racist workplaces. But either people feel that they can't do so because maybe there's a lot of personal relationships involved, or they don't know, they don't actually believe the individual. We still have situations where union reps will still refer matters on to HR and say, well, this is something that HR are going to have to give some advice on. They don't actually feel confident enough to challenge the employer themselves. And I think that part of the reason why that happens is because we still don't have enough Black representatives within our workplaces. We definitely don't. And where there have been Black representatives, the assumption has always been that it is the responsibility of the Black reps to challenge racism and discrimination in the workplace. So we've got to shift a good few dials, but we've also got to call it what it is. And if we are going to build anti-racist workplaces, we then also have to be prepared to make spaces for more diverse, ethnically diverse reps to be coming through the ranks, and that when certain individuals who are more often than not white leaders are leaving those positions, that there are very clear pathways to support another person coming through that doesn't look like them. And it's not just for that, it's not just the one person, but the entire structure around as well then needs to be challenged and needs to be changed. But when we are challenging, whether it's in the workplace or whether it's more widely, people need to feel supported and they need to feel safe in order to do so. And we still found, and we continue to find, here in Wales, that when things are reported or when they get to a particular level, it can become quite personal, and the individual that is supporting the person going through and challenging a particular case ends up in the firing line. And that makes a lot of people really concerned, particularly right now when, of course, there's the cost of living crisis, which of course, you know, isn't of the making of ordinary workers. But at a time like this in particular, people get really nervous about sticking their heads above the parapet. So we have to be really aware as a union movement of what is our role when we are challenging and when we are calling out our governments, when we are calling out employers, that when we are conducting equality audits, race equality audits as well, that we don't just do these on the fringes, but we ask the leading questions and then don't just leave it as a one-off thing that happens maybe during annual pay negotiations, but it is something that we challenge on a regular basis. So any policy, whether there's something coming up in relation to a new way of working, whether it's a bit more serious, perhaps in relation to redundancies that might be coming down the line. Again, that's going to be a big thing that's going to be coming up soon. But also, if there is something in the press or something that happens locally within a particular community where that workplace is set, that we create the right conditions so that people can have conversations about how they feel and what is happening out there, but also what is happening within their own personal lives as well. So that we do have networks, we do have affinity groups where people can share their own experiences. And I'll share my own experience with you. Recently, I had a phone call to say that there had been an incident involving my young child in her primary school. And I had to go in and have some really difficult conversations with the school leader. And this is somebody who I have a good relationship with. It's not like we have an awkward relationship. I was a school governor there previously. And to explain to him, and it was very triggering for me as well, because my child had basically been told to go back to where she was born. Now, there was a part of me that sort of laughed, you know, internally, because I was thinking, ooh, what's that Heath Hospital down the road? Or, you know, what exactly is going on here? But the thing was, is that this was an accumulation of other incidents that had happened in the past involving the same child and mine. And those previous incidences hadn't been formally recorded by the school because the school leader had changed. And I guess the previous one didn't have such good record keeping. So when you've been born and raised in this country and now you're second, third generation and your children are going through the same things that you went through, and just because I happen to be the General Secretary of the Wales TUC doesn't mean that I don't have personal experiences or I don't get triggered or my children won't go through these things either. And of course, our workplaces are an extension of those similar things. So at the moment, the school environment, technically speaking, is my child's workplace. So if that is the experience that she is having there, unless we are really clear about how we're going to tackle systemic structural racism and that formal steps are taken and that we have a level of confidence and that we can be open and frank and trust that something will be done and is done and that we can follow that up, then nothing will change. So we have to be stronger and we have to be ready to continue to challenge, even when it's quite personal and triggering, because of course, I mean, as I said to that head then, I remember growing up here on a regular basis, being chased down the road, being called all the names under the sun, having all kinds of personal direct experiences in relation to my family as well. And after a while, when all of these things pile up, then what do? At some point, you are going to have to physically defend yourself as well. Now, I know that when it comes to my child, they're not going to have the same get out clauses as other people who don't look like her. Now, I know how that affected me and the difficulties that I faced, and I know that many of you on this call and others listening will have faced similar things as well. But these things are all triggering, and when these things happen, now this was a personal matter, but when I go back into my workplace and I'm around other people, I also need to feel safe enough to be able to share what happened to me, and for other people to also perhaps learn and understand from my experience that these things are very, very serious. And they do affect your mental health and well-being, but they also then affect your ability to progress in this society. So it's not just about diversity and inclusion and ticking boxes and giving the right slogans and having the best action plans. It is about creating the conditions and then enforcing and acting to make things better. Not just acting and saying the things that need to be said from the side, but monitoring and evaluating the progression of those various different policies and changes that you have negotiated. You can negotiate the best things out there, but unless you create the conditions on which you can implement and enforce, then nothing will change. So if it's okay, I'll leave it there.
And that's it. We're at the end of this session now. I've got some announcements to do. And colleagues that did ask the questions about campaigning and strikes and all of that, I wasn't glossing over it. There's just sessions where they're going to talk about that much more in depth later on. The next session is going to be opposing institutional racism in our workplaces and communities, which is in BG01 at 1 o'clock. There's going to be halting the rise of the far right, which Wealth, give us a wave, Wealth, come on, is going to be chairing, and that's going to be in BG 102 at also at 1 o'clock. There is going to be a Stop Rwanda Refugees Welcome and Don't Let Scapegoating Divide Us workshop at 1 o'clock, and a Solidarity Forever plenary at 2:45. So those issues are going to be covered in depth in those sessions, and I really hope that you are able to join them. And we're going to be launching, Stand Up to Racism are going to be launching a campaign statement, mobilising for resist racism demonstrations in London, Glasgow and Cardiff on UN Anti-Racism Day. So please do look out for that, and demanding justice for Windrush and an inquiry into the mishandling of Windrush. There's going to be on the 24th of February and 9th of March, days of action with a Twitter storm. I was 43 before I realised what a Twitter storm was, so thank you for explaining that, Wilf. To build for the March 18th demo. There's going to be supporting and promoting the Care for Calais and PCS union policy document demanding safe passage visas, and a pledge for unions to mobilise for any future Stop Rwanda key dates. Developing blocks for demonstrations. There's going to be an educational trip to Auschwitz and organising around that, and building effective campaigns wherever fascists such as Britain First are standing, e.g. Salford and Dartford. And there's going to be, if you want to be part of the organising and supporting another conference for the Conference of the Black Child in 2023, please do, there's Stand Up to Racism colleague all around. Get in touch with them, talk to them, be active is how we're going to really see the change. And really, really importantly, coffee and tea is available outside of this building around Russell Square. There is nothing in the building, so please do go get that, and toilets on every floor. And that's the end of this session. So thank you, and thank you online.